In Caring Arms Chapter 7, will you hold my hand? I have only one request of you, boy. Naruto arched a single brow. The rain continued to fall, soaking him in seconds. He didn't mind, though, as he looked on with a curious gaze. Before him, Rokuro was on his knees, arms severed once again, the seals around his body restraining the demon completely. And what would that be? Naruto asked. Shinobu had since relinquished the child they saved, placing him in Kaneo's arms, and now, she entered a solid stance, drawing her thin blade from its sheath ready to put Lower Moon 2 down for good. My request, Rokuro said, is that you remember me, even after my death. The blonde doctor shrugged. They won't be fond memories, you know. That's perfectly fine, Rokuro continued, death looming over his head. At this point, it was impossible to escape. Not only was he surrounded by demon slayers, but he was also within the range of Naruto, the one who had utterly defeated him and his comrades. I only wish for someone to know that I lived, that I existed. No one else will. Not my fellow demons, and certainly not him. So please, I beg of you, acknowledge my time spent here on earth, if only for 1 second after my death. Shinobu shot forward, her blade plunging into his chest. Rokuro did not attempt to use his shadows, nor did he flinch as that thin sword punctured his heart. He accepted his fate as her most potent poison flooded his body, destroying him from the inside out. Seconds later, he was on the floor, twitching and spasming as life slowly, but surely, left his body. He stared upward for a time, the rain trailing down his face, until the light of existence left his gaze, and all was silent and still. Until a crack of thunder shattered the sudden quiet. Susumaru leapt at Naruto, a spontaneous act, and wrapped her arms around him. His eyes widened momentarily, before he relaxed into her touch. Like him, she was soaked, drops of water trailing down her orange-tinted hair. She stayed this way for a time, just holding him, before reality seemed to snap Susumaru from her trance-like state. A blush colored her pale cheeks, she quickly pulled away, rubbing her neck in embarrassment. What was that for? Naruto asked, smiling. Susumaru looked away, clearing her throat. And nothing. Just glad that you're okay. I see. In that case, I'm sorry for scaring you, Naruto replied. He turned to Yuichiro, who had also moved to stand by his side. The teen shivered in the rain, but he seemed rather happy, considering all that had recently transpired. Naruto tousled his turquoise locks, smile widening. And again, I'm sorry that you went through this mess. I should have done more to keep you safe. Yuichiro brushed his apology off, gazing up at the person he considered an older brother. I already told you that it's okay. A rare grin etched across his gentle features. But yeah, you should have done more to keep me safe. If I'd died, the whole clinic would be out of business within a week. Naruto laughed. You're right. I can't risk losing you if I want the place to stay functional for more than a day. Despite the rain, he pulled both Yuichiro and Susumaru into a hug, an arm around either of their shoulders. They did nothing to resist his hold, both of them looking up at him with bright, happy eyes. It was a peaceful moment, all things considered, interrupted only by one person. Shinobu watched with her head tilted. She retracted her sword from Rokuro's corpse, flicking the blade and sending a splatter of blood onto the grass, where it was soon washed away by the rain. She turned to the trio, eyes calm, and a beautiful smile on her lips. Dr. Uzumaki, Shinobu called in a soothing tone. Naruto looked up, letting his two companions go. He took a protective step forward and stood in front of Susumaru. Yes, Miss Koko. Shinobu lifted a hand, pointing a single finger in their direction. Toward Susumaru. Are you aware that there's a demon standing right behind you? His eyes narrowed, and he took another step, putting himself between the Hashira and his friends. I'm well aware, he replied. I assumed Ozaki and Murata informed you of this fact. She nodded with smile. Yes, yes. They did. But I was too occupied with the situation at hand to pay much attention to this little detail. Ozaki and Murata shared a nervous glance, looking between Naruto and the insect Hashira. A tension had arisen between them, one that was almost palpable, one that they didn't dare infringe upon, not even with their words. Shinobu looked Naruto in the eyes. He did not flinch, even as she masterfully twirled her sword and pointed it in his direction. You must know this by now, Dr. Uzumaki, the woman continued. I am a demon slayer. So are these three. As such, we have dedicated our lives, our very bodies to the cause of eradicating every demon from the face of this country. We train endlessly, take on dangerous missions, and sacrifice everything in order to achieve this goal. Shinobu's eyes flickered towards Susumaru, an imperceptible anger burning in those purple orbs. Thus, as a member of the Demon Slayer Corps, it is my sworn duty to execute creatures just like her. Shinobu blurred forward without warning, thundering toward them. Not again, Naruto internally groaned. They clashed, sparks flying despite the water falling from the sky. Oh my, said Shinobu. Naruto had instantly pulled out a kunao, parrying her thrust as it came careening his way. A moment passed. She pulled back, then began anew. Her thrusts came quicker than ever, piercing through the air. She was fast, he'd admit. Faster than anyone he'd encountered in this world. But to him, that simply did not matter. Time slowed to a crawl. And he could see it. Her blade moved forward, parting the rain as it came dangerously close to his face. The glint of steel filled his vision, and he dodged, weaving past a flurry of well-aimed blows. She stabbed upward, downward, then toward the left, then the right. But the results were the same. Naruto avoided every thrust with ease, kunao rising to deflect her final attack. A clang of steel against steel echoed around them. All this while, he had not moved from the place he stood. Shinobu noticed this, her eyes sparking with a hint of awe. Finally, he moved forward, planting a kick to her chest. Her face scrunched up momentarily, before she was sent flying skidding to a halt as she plunged her sword into the earth, slowing her momentum. Kaneo quickly leapt to her mentor's side, only after placing the child she held somewhere safe. The teen drew her sword, blank gaze landing on Naruto. Having the wind knocked out of you was no fun. Shinobu grimaced as she stood, sucking a sharp breath in an attempt to dull the pain that now burned at her chest. Kaneo took a step forward, prepared to do battle, but Shinobu stopped her, grabbing the teen by the wrist. Then the Hashira stood up, she glanced toward the blonde that had kicked her 20 meters away, a small frown marring his handsome features. It's all right, Kaneo, Shinobu said, loud enough for all to hear. Put your blade away. We can't beat him. Kaneo seemed conflicted, her resolve wavering, until she complied and removed her sword from view. The Hashira also sheathed her blade, that same smile returning to her face. She held up both hands and chuckled. Seems like I can't win this one, huh, she confessed, walking toward them once again. Naruto still stood protectively in front of Susumaru, kunao in hand. I concede, okay. I won't try to attack again. Naruto didn't let his guard down, but the tension in the air began to lighten. Just when I thought we started to see eye to eye, you attack me. That's unfortunate, Miss Coco. He rubbed his wet blonde hair. But honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. These two over here, he inclined his head toward Ozaki and Murata, tried exactly what you just did yesterday. Must be a demon slayer thing. Hit first, ask questions later. Ozaki and Murata both looked away, shuffling with embarrassment. Oh. Did they? Shinobu inquired. I would hope they did, since not killing a demon on sight is against core rules. She crossed her arms. But even worse than that is the fact that they were willing to vouch for a demon. She looked over to Ozaki and Murata, pinning them with those calm purple orbs. This act stands against everything we do as demon slayers. You two understand just how serious this is, correct? Murata dipped his head, and Ozaki said, "Yes, Lady Coco. We're aware." Shinobu nodded slowly. "And you're also aware that you can be relieved of duty for this, in which your uniforms will be taken, and your swords confiscated." Murata swallowed, slowly lowered his head. "Why yes, ma'am." The Hashira continued. She moved to stand in front of the two younger slayers. "Are you ready to stake all that training, all those years spent becoming a demon slayer on what you told me earlier?" she questioned. "Are you willing to throw it all away to protect that demon?" Both of them nodded, despite the potential consequences their actions would bring. Ozaki glanced at Susumaru, then returned her gaze to Shinobu. I'm not totally convinced myself, but the fact still remains, Lady Coco. She has done nothing to indicate she behaves like typical demons." Ozaki took a shuddering breath, as though fearful to let go of all the hatred that had built up within her for so many years. "When we arrived in Tokyo, she was the first demon we found. So, naturally, we went after her. She hadn't done anything to us, but we attacked without warning, or mercy. Still, she did not lift a finger against us. She never fought back. She even protected us when the lower moons attacked, despite the fact that we had hurt her the day before." Ozaki turned to Susumaru. "And even though we were injured and bleeding, she made no attempts to attack us." Naruto looked at Susumaru fondly. She was somewhat surprised the Demon Slayer duo were actually standing up for her. Shinobu nodded slowly, still not convinced, but she left Ozaki and Murata alone. She turned to Naruto once more. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you some kind of demon as well?" Naruto almost rolled his eyes, recalling when the pair of demon slayers thought the same thing a night ago. "He's not." Murata blurted, then winced, holding onto his bandaged side. We thought the same when we first met him, but he proved to us that he isn't a demon, that he's human by standing in the sun." "Is that so?" Shinobu inquired. She smiled sweetly. "If you are in fact human, then how can you do the things that I witnessed in the cave? Making copies of yourself. Standing on vertical surfaces. Restraining high-level demons with a slip of paper. Could you explain?" She was wary, but also curious. Genuinely interested in him and his unnatural abilities. "My anatomy deviates from yours in subtle, yet impactful ways," he explained, referring to his chakra circulatory system, something almost indistinguishable from the cardiovascular system. "I'm a bit different from normal humans, but I'm not a demon." "Different, you say?" Shinobu repeated. She stroked her chin, considering his words. "Unfortunately, I'm still not sure I believe you." "Why not?" Naruto asked. He wasn't angry. Just curiously. After all, Ozaki and Murata had affirmed his statements. "That wound on your leg." She pointed downward. "It looked far worse a minute ago." "That's also another one of my abilities." Shinobu moved closer, eyeing him. His face. His body. Her sharp gaze trailed along his physique, intrigued by the human standing before her. "In that case, are you willing to prove that you aren't a demon?" she asked. Not to be outplayed, he too moved closer, until he loomed over her tiny form. "Sure. What do you want me to do, stand out in the sun?" The Hashira shook her head. "No. That won't be necessary." She gripped the hilt of her katana. "Allow me to inject you with my poison. That's the only way I'll be convinced. And no worries. Even high doses are harmless to humans." She demonstrated this fact by slicing her forearm with the weapon, the subtle tint of purple poison painting her wound. Yuichiro began to protest, but Naruto waved him off. Fine, Miss Coco. But only on one condition. She fluttered her lengthy eyelashes, looking up at him with that ever-present smile. What sort of condition? You have to ensure that Ozaki and Murata won't be punished. Naruto crossed his arms. They acted bravely today, put themselves in harm's way to protect civilians. It would be unfair for their reputation to be tarnished, simply because they broke one silly rule. Dr. Uzumaki, cried Shinobu, feigning alarm. I do believe you've garnered some misconceptions about me. Dishonesty is not a part of who I am. I will look at the facts objectively and deliver an honesty report when I return to headquarters. Naruto's shoulders eased of their tension. All right, then. Go ahead. Your hand, please, she implored. Everyone watched closely as he stretched out his hand. Shinobu took it and was surprised by how warm he felt, despite the pouring rain. I'll be gentle. Shinobu unsheathed her sword and lowered his arm. She carefully stabbed the center of his palm, puncturing his skin, letting not only the poison in, but his crimson blood out where it flowed and fell to the ground. Several seconds passed. Naruto didn't start convulsing on the ground, nor did he show any signs of discomfort. Shinobu's smile widened. She retracted her blade and placed it into her white scabbard. Well, I was totally wrong. Shinobu exclaimed, closing her eyes as she smiled. Looks like you really aren't a demon, after all. She glanced at Ozaki and Murata. And if these two are also convinced about this demon, I'm sure there's some truth concerning their claims about her. So you believe what we told you? Asked Murata. She smiled softly. No, no. I never said I believe it. I still need some evidence, especially when I report back to headquarters. Unfortunately, I can't tell a lie, or alter details, so I'll have to include everything that occurred, as well as your involvement with her. And your involvement with Dr. Uzumaki, as well. Which meant they could still be severely punished. Ozaki tremored at the thought, and not just because of the rain. She glanced at Murata, who seemed firm in his conviction concerning Naruto and Susumaru. She found her strength renewed by his strong gaze, so she nodded in response to the Hashira's words. We understand, Lady Coco. Ozaki dipped her head in respect. Good, Shinobu said cheerfully. She let go of Naruto's hand before proceeding to tear off a piece of her insect-patterned haori. Naruto arched a brow as she grasped his hand once more, wrapping the white fabric tightly around his injured palm. You don't have to do that, he said. The bleeding would have stopped in a few minutes. Shinobu shrugged. She finished tying her improvised bandage, gently squeezing his hand as she finally let go. As a healer, letting injuries go untreated, especially one that I inflicted, doesn't sit right with me. I'm sure you feel the same way as well. In a way, he did, recalling when he had treated Ozaki and Murata after their initial skirmish. Shinobu looked around. The rain wasn't as harsh as before, but it still persisted, tiny drops of water pelting her skin. The hostages were huddled under a tree, overseen by Naruto's ever-present copies. Shinobu almost laughed. Truly, she stood no chance against him in a real battle. And neither did the lower moons, it seemed. May I speak with you privately, the Hashira implored. Naruto thought for a moment, then nodded. He left with her, assuring Yuichiro and Susumaru that he would be fine. At the moment, they did not seem particularly fond of Shinobu. Kaneo also tried to follow, but Shinobu waved her away. Don't worry. We're just going to talk. A flicker of emotion bloomed in the teen's blank gaze, but she only nodded and remained where she was. Shinobu didn't take him far, only to the entrance of the collapsed cave, still smoldering as dust continued to flow from the inside. Firstly, allow me to apologize for attacking you, the Hashira said genuinely. If I'm to be completely honest, Part of my reason for such actions was to appraise your combat ability. You demon slayers are all strange, Naruto remarked, then tilted his head. How do you rate me, then? She smirked playfully. Not very high. And Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. Shinobu moved closer, she peered into the collapsed cave. What happened to that demon? She inquired. I attacked her with a technique that brought the entire cave crashing on her head, he explained. I also sealed the entrance. There were no other exits in the cave, so she's trapped in there. The Hashira inspected the entrance of the cave, sharp eyes roaming over the massive rocks that had been purposefully collapsed, effectively covering both entry and exit. After several minutes of observation, she finally nodded, convinced by his explanation. Naruto eyed her closely. What will you do now? I'm returning to the city, Shinobu revealed. In case there's another demon attack, I need to be there to help. Both of them left the entrance of the cave. They then paused when they saw the people that had been put through this frightening ordeal. Some of them were injured, and his clones were tending to their wounds, inspecting those who were worse off. Naruto frowned. He'd rather them get medical attention in a cleaner setting. So you're a doctor? Shinobu glanced his way. A great one at that, I hear. He looked rather sheepish. Murata said that, didn't he? Yes. She nodded with a smile. He didn't go into much detail, though, since I was in a rush to find the lower moons at the time. Technically, his path to becoming a doctor was a strange one. He didn't attend school here in this world. But his skills in medicine had been so impressive, that Tomoyo, a doctor with some influence, had recommended him to be approved by the Japanese Medical Association in Tokyo. After a week of study, thanks to numerous shadow clones, he aced all the exams and proved his competency in all forms of medical practice, even ones unheard of in this world. With that settled, he'd have something productive to do while trying to find a way back home. You also mentioned that you were a healer, Naruto remarked. The Hashira nodded. Again, that smile did not match the look in her emotionless eyes. I'm not officially a doctor, but I do know much about the human body. She stroked her chin in thought. Actually, I'm more of a pharmacist, if I were to describe myself. Considering her usage of poison, it made a lot of sense. As they continued to walk, Shinobu considered many things. Most notably, the blonde beside her. Of all the things she had witnessed in her life, this was one of the most unexpected. A man, untrained by the Demon Slayer Corps, had actually been able to hold his own against not only her, but 3 members of the 12 Kizuki. She found it both disconcerting and exciting. Perhaps she should try bringing him into their organization, where he could become even more powerful by learning a breathing style. He would be a force to be reckoned with, and maybe the key to finally eradicating all demons from the face of the planet. However, the fact that he was sympathetic to even one demon was problematic. With this little feature of his beliefs, those in the Corps, especially her fellow Hashira, would never accept him. Hell, she wasn't sure of what she was feeling at moment. Her anger and hatred for demons still burned like a roaring fire. But maybe, just maybe, that could start to change. If this demon named Susumaru proved herself, Shinobu would be willing to see things from a different perspective. For her older sister's sake. Finally nearing the group of people, Shinobu asked, "What will you do about them?" Naruto crossed his arms. It's counterintuitive to treat them here in this harsh weather. Many of them were shivering, huddled closely under a tree. I'll take them to my clinic, have them thoroughly checked out, he continued. You're welcome to join me if you want. I have plenty of rooms to spare. Shinobu nodded slowly, convinced that he just wanted to keep an eye on her. At least, for a little while. Until he could trust her. That sounds like a wonderful idea, she said happily. But what about that demon, the one you buried? What do you plan to do about that one? I'll leave a clone here overnight, he assured. If something were to happen, or if she were to try to escape, one of me should be enough to hold her down. The insect Hashira considered his words. The weather was bad, and she wanted to get back to the city, where she would be ready if another large-scale demon attack took place. So, perhaps, this was for the best. I suppose I have no other choice but to trust you on this, she finally said. That's interesting, considering the fact that I don't trust you yet, he replied. Shinobu tilted her head innocently, smiling as he spoke. But if Ozaki and Murata can see the good in Susumaru, I think you and your student will come around as well. That's awfully optimistic of you, Dr. Uzumaki. Shinobu inched closer, eyes glinting as lightning flashed above. I might just pull something when you aren't watching. Naruto grinned, gaze meeting her own. You're not stupid, Miss Coco. I know you won't try anything while I'm around. And while Ozaki and Murata were around, as well. Despite her higher rank, she still seemed to care about her subordinates. That's true, she admitted, clasping both hands behind her back. Finally, they arrived at where the former hostages were staying. Naruto proceeded to explain that he would take care of all of them, free of charge, and he would make sure that all their injuries would be further examined at his clinic. Those were demons, weren't they? Someone asked. He seemed to be a father, holding his wife and child closely as it rained, the same child he and the Hashira had protected. Naruto glanced at Shinobu. She stepped forward, expression warm and kind. Yes, she explained. Those were, in fact, demons. However, you're safe now. We've made sure to eliminate them. I've always been suspicious of their existence, the man continued. When you hear all those stories of people going missing, especially outside of the city, you have to wonder if those tales are actually true. They're true, all of it, Shinobu admitted. But the government suppresses the truth, choosing to ignore the problem, even as it festers and continues to worsen. Hearing her words, the crowd seemed to cower fearfully. So she continued. But do not be afraid. As members of the Demon Slayer Corps, my fellow swordsmen and I fight to protect those who can't protect themselves. Even if those in authority continue to ignore this issue, we won't. We'll continue to fight, for your sake, and for the sake of your loved ones. Her voice was soft, yet powerful, banishing the trepidation that had begun to grow in these people. Naruto watched her closely, crossing his arms. Shinobu was fascinating. She was a woman that hid her emotions yet strived to comfort those in need. You saved my son's life, the same man said. Thank you. Both of you. He paused. I'm curious, though. Why were you two just fighting? Both of them glanced at each other, the blonde doctor chuckling sheepishly. Later Naruto used his clones to transport the people back to the city. Each of his copies carried the severely injured to his home. But one of them stayed behind, with the intention of making sure that Mukago did not escape from her prison. Shinobu also followed, officially accepting the offer to stay at his clinic. Now that he thought about it, carrying so many people was odd, and it would serve to draw unwanted attention. As a result, once in the city, they stuck to the rooftops, staying out of sight as they made their way to his home. Those who weren't injured were dropped off at shelters along with those who had lost their homes during the Lower Moon's attack. So, left with about 10 people, Naruto did his best to help those who truly needed it. And for the first time in a long time, the clinic bustled with activity. Susumaru had retired to her room, not willing to intrude in an area she did not understand. Kaneo was outside, sitting near his front door, where she would not be soaked by the rain. He'd given her a towel to dry herself, even as she observed his garden, ever ready for any potential demon attacks. Fortunately, Yuichiro hadn't been too injured, so he decided help those that needed aid more than him. Presently, he was upstairs tending to Ozaki and Murata, both of them seated on a hospital bed. Their wounds were bad, but not as bad as some of the people Naruto and Shinobu were attending to. "Are you sure you don't want Naruto to see you right now?" Yuichiro asked. He removed Ozaki's bloody bandage and inspected her arm, which had a deep bite mark in the muscles near the elbow. She winced as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic, before wrapping it in fresh bandages. Ozaki nodded, sweat falling down her brow. "I can wait. The civilians come first." "Okay," Yuichiro said softly. He admired their strength, because honestly, though these injuries weren't life-threatening, they were still serious enough to warrant attention. Yet they held strong, choosing to wait. The teen moved on to Murata, who was shirtless, bleeding through the bandage he had hastily wrapped around his side. Yuichiro inspected the injury, cleaned it, then frowned. "I can't do much about your wound." Grabbing a fresh cloth, he handed it to Murata. "Hold this. Put pressure there until the bleeding lessens. And take this." Yuichiro didn't like giving opioids for pain, due to their addictive nature, but Naruto had given him permission to use small doses if needed. Murata swallowed the tablet offered, downing it with a cup of water. His teeth were grit as he used his other arm to put pressure on the wound, the pain making him wince. He soon felt Ozaki take his hand in hers, giving a little squeeze. Murata relaxed at her touch, and Yuichiro draped them in a large towel, since both of them were soaked and had begun to shiver. "Thank you," said Murata, smiling. "No problem." Yuichiro began organizing his supplies. "But you two deserve the real praise after what you did tonight." Ozaki shrugged. "It's our job. No praise required." Her eyes lingered on his face, a perplexed look crossing her features. Then her gaze found his arm, or rather, his missing limb, displayed through his sleeveless shirt. Yuichiro followed her gaze. "A demon did this, if that's what you're wondering." "I figured," she said. After all, the wound seemed unnatural, different from a normal amputation. Murata frowned. "I'm sorry. I wish a demon slayer had been there to help you when it happened." "I've gotten over it," Yuichiro said softly. "And I've also realized that it's impossible to save everyone. So don't feel sad about what happened me. Just strive to help as many people as possible. I mean, look at what both of you did tonight. Even though some people died in the process, you still helped save so many. You should be proud of that." Even though he looked younger than them, he was so mature, so wise. And as Ozaki continued to observe this teen, that same nagging question returned to her mind. "May I ask what your name is?" she inquired. They hadn't really interacted with him yesterday. "You know ours, but we don't know yours." He smiled. "Yuichiro Tokaido." Both Murata and Ozaki shared a sharp glance, eyes widening in surprise. They remained silent for a while, letting that name sink in. Then they returned to the issue at hand, unsure of the right words to say next. "Are you by any chance related to someone named Muichiro?" Murata finally asked. Now it was Yuichiro's turn to freeze, a chill of hope tingling down his spine. How do you know that name?" he all but demanded, tremoring where he stood. Ozaki perked up. "So you do know him?" "Why yes, that was the name of my younger brother," he quickly answered. "Now, please tell me. How do you know him?" "He's Demon Slayer, just like us," Murata revealed. "In fact, he's a Hashira, one of the most powerful members in the entire corps. He's similar to Lady Coco in that regard." Yuichiro stumbled back, nearly dropping his medical supplies. Tears brimmed in his turquoise eyes. The normally calm, level-headed teen seemed to fall apart, unwilling to believe it until he got more evidence. He's alive?" Yuichiro asked tentatively. He leaned against a table. "Tell me you aren't lying to me," he begged. Is my younger brother really, truly alive?" Ozaki didn't know why, but she felt a surge of emotion building within her. She was instantly reminded of her own brother, who she had lost when she was only a child. He is, she promised. He's alive, and he's fine. In fact, he's better than fine. Murata nodded, still holding onto his side. Master Tokaido is an amazing person. He's most likely out there saving countless people from demons as we speak. You've gotta be kidding me. Yuichiro's voice shook. He couldn't take it anymore. The tears began to flow, more freely than it had since he first awoke in Naruto's care those years ago when he had first realized the truth of his younger brother's death. But it seemed that was no truth. His brother was alive. And in that moment, he let hope bloom in his heart. Yuichiro couldn't help it, laughing and crying at the same time. Downstairs, Shinobu and Naruto moved through the clinic, inspecting and treating those in need. Despite just being at odds with each other, they worked together like a well-oiled machine. Even though she specialized in pharmaceuticals, Shinobu was still knowledgeable about practical treatments for patients with traumatic injuries. Her hands moved with the instincts of someone that witnessed a variety of wounds in their daily lives, most likely from treating hurt or dying demon slayers as they returned from the front lines. She sutured many lacerations, approximating semi-serious gashes with a calm gaze and a confident demeanor. She handled the less egregious wounds, while Naruto oversaw the more dreadful ones. It was busy for an hour or so before things began to die down. Most of the patients had already been tended to by Naruto's clones when they were still outside the city, and a lot of what she did involved inspecting said injuries and making adjustments to any wounds that might have reopened on the journey back to Nerima. She made sure to clean them thoroughly, as well as administer pain medication to those who desperately needed it. Even now, when less patients were being seen, things didn't stop there. While she and Naruto had been taking care of the injured hostages, other patients, those who had been hurt in the initial attack, were brought to his clinic from the general hospitals in Nerima. Shinobu had been shocked by this. Surely, a larger facility would have been more equipped for those that were in truly serious condition. But that wasn't the case, it seemed. Naruto had a reputation here. So much so that hospitals actually opted to bring their patients to him when there was nothing more they could do. And now, after finishing with the former hostages, Shinobu watched him work on another patient that had been transported from a general hospital, despite the rain, just so Naruto could see them. It was a young woman. She was covered in blood, with horrible bite marks all over her body. "We're sorry for the inconvenience, doctor," one medic said. "We've just been over capacity tonight. That wild animal attack has every hospital up to their necks in patients." Naruto waved them off with a soft smile. "Don't worry, you two. I understand. And I'll make sure she survives." The two medics dipped their heads, then left, presumably to return to the hospital they came from. "Animal attack," he said. "That's what they're calling it, apparently," Shinobu replied. "How convenient." Naruto rolled up his sleeves. A sheen of sweat coated his brow. He seemed a bit more tired, eyes heavy with exhaustion. But he persisted, washing his hands as he prepared to take care of the woman bleeding out on the surgical table. Shinobu didn't think the woman could be saved, considering all the blood she was losing. Yet Naruto moved forward, and so did she, keen on observing his next actions up close. What she saw shocked her. Something that seemed a hopeless situation was turned around in a matter of minutes. He cleaned the woman's wounds, and with precise surgical tools, also removed fragments of teeth embedded by Mukago's demon animals. Then he did something she would have considered impossible were it not for the fact that she had already witnessed him performing other supernatural techniques. He healed her quite literally. Naruto stretched out both palms and focused. A green glow, just subtle enough to be seen, extended forward, targeting the vicious bites along the woman's body. In time, her injuries began to close, mended by an energy exclusive to him. His act seemed simple, Yet Shinobu could tell that this technique required incredible precision and focus. He maintained a steady stream, adjusting it accordingly as the patient's wounds were healed, her cells responding to his chakra, regrowing tissue, bone, and skin. The rest was handled by sutures, in which he approximated the corners of larger lacerations. This must have been what his clones did to the hostages, even back in the forest. No wonder the other patient's wounds weren't as serious as she'd anticipated. He had already started healing them before they arrived at the clinic. By the time he was finished, the woman's features were calm, peaceful, and she was fast asleep. Naruto picked her up and carried her to an empty bed, where she could rest. My. You become more interesting by the second, Shinobu remarked, hiding her shock behind a false smile. No wonder Ozaki and Murata praised your skills as a physician. It's not my best work, but she'll live. I only made sure to heal the worst of her injuries, Naruto said, shrugging. And I'm not the best, either. I can name 2 people whose skills in healing far exceed my own. Oh. Shinobu tilted her head. There are others like you. Not here in Japan, he revealed. In my home country. Far from here. You're not from Japan, asked the Hashira, growing more interested by the second. Naruto managed a small smile. Nope. Not at all. Shinobu wanted to ask more questions. However, he was already turning away, headed to the basement where his demon friend was, and where the insect Hashira was prohibited from entering. Hopefully, the hospitals don't send any more patients, Naruto remarked. You're a medical expert, so I know you can handle the people already here. He began walking downstairs. Feel free to eat anything you want. There's plenty of food for everyone, and my student is a pretty great cook. With that, he descended to his mysterious basement. To do what? She had no idea. But things were becoming more and more fascinating. Of all the things that could have happened tonight, meeting someone like Naruto was the least expected. Once again, she considered his numerous, seemingly endless, abilities and wondered. Was it possible for Naruto to cure Master Yabayashiki of his mysterious illness? The thought echoed in her mind, and a pulse of hope filled Shinobu's heart. The master, the sole leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, had suffered for so long, slowly succumbing to a disease even she couldn't understand, riddled with blindness, frailty, and horrible lavender-colored scars. So perhaps this was her chance to help him, to help the one that had held the organization together for many, many years, despite his condition. Shinobu lifted her arms in back-arching stretch. Her clothes were wet, and rain continued to fall. Kaneo was still outside, keeping watch with a towel wrapped around her body. Shinobu frowned slightly. She'd make sure to call her Tsugyuko inside. What an interesting day, the Hashira said to herself, thinking. I wonder if there's a place I can take a bath. Naruto unlocked the room with a pulse of chakra. The door opened up to him, revealing a place covered in the runes of complex Fuinjutsu. 6 of his clones were still seated in a circle, their arms outstretched. Their irises were yellow, the outside of their eyes tinted orange, a telltale sign of natural energy flowing through them. They were all shirtless as well, and upon their bodies were marking seals meant to act as chakra receivers, somewhat similar to Nagato's black rods, by which he could transfer his chakra into them from vast distances. The only difference between this and what Nagato did with the paths of pain was the fact that Naruto could not manipulate the movement of his clones. He did not control their actions, but in return, he had greater range when it came to him and Kurama supplying them chakra. With these seals etched on their bodies, he could travel great distances without worry and still be able to provide energy to the portal. Finally, Naruto rubbed his rain-sodden hair, a yawn escaping his lips. Sorry for the wait, Kurama. You better be, brat. Naruto chuckled, walking in. He grabbed a pad of paper, a brush, and a vial of ink. How's it looking? Not terrible, but not good, either. I've managed to stabilize the outer ring. However, it won't stop shrinking. The blonde frowned. Even a few moments of diverting Kurama's chakra had been enough to disrupt much of his progress. Naruto crossed his arms and hummed, considering what to do next. He certainly wasn't the greatest Fuinjutsu user to ever live, and to many, this would be a nigh insurmountable task, but he wouldn't give up. He couldn't give up. No matter the setbacks. No matter the failings that came with completing this project, he would find a way. As tired as he was, Naruto still got to work. He observed the portal which to him, looked like a pitch-black tear in the fabric of space. It tremored and shook, vibrating, slowly but surely closing, even as Kurama and his clones worked to feed it ample amounts of chakra in a controlled, meticulous stream. What he'd given to have a Rhine Sharingan. If he did, opening portals would have been much, much easier. Naruto stroked his chin in thought. He stretched out a hand and focused, and while he did, he felt a familiar pricking sensation in the air, flowing from the area his clones occupied. An idea suddenly popped into his head. What if I added a new pattern around my clones? What sort of pattern? One that stops residual chakra from escaping the room. Explain. I hadn't noticed it until now, but there's a level of chakra in the air a lot of which isn't being fed into the portal. Interesting, rumbled Kurama. So, in essence, you wish to contain every bit of chakra that might be escaping without our knowledge. Exactly. Naruto moved closer, just outside the diameter of his clones. Doing that might provide just enough energy to stop the portal from closing. It might work, Kurama said. Do you have an array strong enough? I think so. Or at least, he had a combination of seals he could use. Naruto sat down and began to write on the pad of papers in his hand. Even as the portal shrank, he took his time, racking his brain for any notable information Jiraiya had taught him, any special patterns that would aid in a containment seal strong enough to prevent chakra leakage from his clones and into the atmosphere. It took some time, but he found something that would work. Inspired by the very one on his stomach, Naruto had crafted an array similar to the 8-trigram seal that contained Kurama's chakra within him. It would consist of a spherical base that circled around his clones, effectively containing them, as well as any chakra that might be escaping or seeping out. With that, nearly 100% of the energy he and Kurama funneled to his clones would be contained in this small area, preventing unnecessary expenditures of chakra. Naruto gave his design a look, before asking Kurama to scrutinize it for errors or inconsistencies. I approve. Good. Time to get started. Naruto pulled out a kunai. He looked at his palm, once again noticing the cloth Shinobu had tied around his hand. As unorthodox as she was, he could tell she at least strived to do the right thing as seen during their time in the cave. Of course, he didn't fully trust Shinobu, but he was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. Naruto untied the piece of her haori, the cut she'd given him nearly healed. Then he gave himself a new injury, slicing his index and middle fingers. Blood flowed heavily, and he stooped down and began to draw his newest design. For something this important, he opted to use his blood which, according to Fuinjutsu research, might have possessed stronger properties than simple ink. If memory served him well, Kakashi had explained that he also used his blood to contain Sasuke's curse mark, back during the Chunin exams. After a moment of deliberation, Naruto decided to use both. His blood would form the outer perimeter behind his clones, and ink would be used for the inner perimeter. Once done, he wiped off the blood dripping down his hand, before sitting down just outside the boundary of the circular pattern he had created. One more thing left. Don't overdo it, Naruto, Kurama warned. You've already used up large amounts of reserve chakra today. Yeah, got it, he thought back. Kurama was right, though. Keeping Susumaru company during nighttime. The fight with the 3 lower moons. Constantly feeding chakra into his clones. then healing all those people, as well as what he was about to do now. Naruto felt like doing nothing but taking a long nap after this. He stooped down one more time, pushing Chirka from his body and into the ground, which activated the seal. The intricate patterns glowed dimly, lighting up the room. Susumaru perked up. In her room, the lamp seemed to flicker. She glanced away from the book, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi, which she'd been reading. Almost halfway through the story, she found herself engrossed by the writing, filled with depictions of ninja villages and brutal wars. Placing the book down, she glanced at her lamp. A moment later, a familiar feeling washed over her. The same one she'd felt when Naruto confronted the lower moons in the city. It was warm, then cool, akin to a wave passing through her body. It was subtle, but just noticeable enough for her to sit up in bed. But as soon as it came, the feeling was gone. Curious, Susumaru rose from her bed and opened the door. A long hallway greeted her. Across from the lengthy corridor was another room, the one whose door was covered in those strange patterns Naruto usually crafted. Seals, she recalled. Not many areas in the clinic were off limits. In fact, none of them were. Not really. Except for this one room. Yuichiro wasn't allowed to enter it, either. And Naruto had made it clear that they shouldn't even attempt to look inside, lest they expose themselves to unnecessary danger. Still, Susumaru doubted she could actually enter that room, judging by the seals that decorated the door. Yet her curiosity remained. Just as she left her room for a closer look, the patterned door opened, and Naruto stepped out. She almost jumped, because his eyes instantly met hers. Susumaru laughed awkwardly, but Naruto only smiled, beckoning to her. She moved forward as he shut the door behind him, a subtle glow enveloping the wooden frame. "This was a strange night, huh?" he asked tiredly. Susumaru leaned against the wall. "Yeah. It felt like a blur, though." She crossed her arms, glancing his way. "I still can't believe you were attacked by members of the 12 Kizuki. I can't say I'm surprised. Demons have always attacked me, even before I met you." "Right." Susumaru shuffled uncomfortably. "Hey, don't give me that look," Naruto said softly. "What you did in the past is just that, in the past. I told you this already, didn't I?" I know," she replied. "It's just. I still feel guilty," he asked. She nodded, and he joined her against the wall, crossing his arms and resting his head upon its hard surface. "Miss Tamayo told me that she still feels guilty about what she's done, even after so many years," Susumaru explained. "And I don't know if it's alright for me to let go of the guilt or keep it as a reminder of all the horrible things I've done, so I never fall back to my old ways." Naruto listened to her intently, and she was glad that he did. That alone was enough to ease her mind. The fact that someone actually cared enough to listen. "Honestly, I'm not sure how to answer that," he said, then smiled. "But I'm here for you if you ever need to talk, okay?" "Okay." Her smile mirrored his own. "Thanks, Naruto." "No problem." He stifled a yawn. "Also, good job today. You protected a lot people. Even Ozaki and Murata noticed. They really stood up for you out there." Naruto scratched his whiskered cheek with a finger. "I feel kind of proud of you, too." Susumaru's face warmed, and she looked away. "Well, I didn't do much. At least, when compared to you." "Hey now. Don't change the subject. I'm praising you, not me." Naruto chuckled, and Susumaru continued to flush under his praise. Still, they kept on talking, recounting the events of the night, even straying into light-hearted topics as well. After a while, Susumaru mustered the courage to ask him something that had been weighing on her mind for some time now. "Hey, do you think," she began, shuffling nervously. Is it possible for me to come with you when you leave Japan? Silence. Susumaru glanced at him, then paused. Naruto. To her surprise, he'd actually fallen asleep, arms still crossed as the weariness finally caught up to him. She smiled warmly, observing his peaceful features. Tentatively, she reached out and gently stroked his cheek with her thumb, enthralled by the small indentations of his whisker-like birthmarks. Good night, Naruto. Outskirts of Tokyo, she could hardly move, could barely even blink. Her body felt heavy, numb. That last, desperate attack had taken everything she had. Everything she could muster. And yet, Naruto had defeated her, destroying her giant form with one powerful technique, bringing the entire cave crashing on her head. It was both frightening and incredible. But the battle was over. Kamino was dead. Rokuro, most likely dead. However, that didn't matter. Because she'd done it. As a smaller wolf, she managed to sink her teeth into his flesh, and she tasted the most incredible thing in the world. She'd never had such blood. Such enchanting, alluring, potent blood. Even as the cave collapsed around her, she could do nothing but succumb to bliss. A bliss so enrapturing that her eyes rolled into the back of her head and her body twitched and spasmed with waves upon waves of pleasure. Even now, she could taste it. Different from Musen's blood, but just as satisfying. Like it was on an opposite spectrum, yet incredible, nonetheless. Myokugo panted as she crawled out of that cave. Her wolf, the only one not buried alive, led the way, digging through the rocks that blocked the exit. It seemed to take hours, hours of crawling and digging. But finally, the outside world opened up, her animal pushing past a massive boulder, before a flash of lightning signified her escape. She continued to move, dragging her body against the ground. Her wolf paused to help, licking her cheek as it pulled her by the hem of her kimono. Myokugo smiled softly. Few had ever cared about her like her animals did, and she was grateful to have them. Suddenly, Myokugo's wolf stopped pulling her. It turned sharply, growling dangerously as someone stood at the entrance of the cave, kunao in hand. Oh! He was still here. What did she expect, though? That he'd leave without making sure she died? Of course he wouldn't. Her wolf lunged at the blonde, teeth glinting in the dark. But Naruto didn't flinch, cutting her creature down in seconds. He stabbed a kunao through its head, then moved to where she was, looming over her. Weakened by the fusion with her animals, Myokugo could do nothing. She felt him pull her from the inside of the cave, stray rocks falling as he did. Outside, rain pelted her skin, soaking her thoroughly. Naruto stooped down and placed a slip of paper on her stomach, and suddenly, she could not move a muscle. He did the same for her wolf, which was now next to her, its warm fur against her body. Myokugo was on her back, and all she could do was stare at the sky, the rain drenching her silver hair as flashes of lightning painted the sky. Naruto sat down beside her, arms crossed, leaning his head against the exterior of the cave. Waiting till sunrise, Myokugo realized. The reality of her death slowly but surely crept to the surface, a shiver of fear running through her. He didn't say a word, just sat there, gazing forward, observing the forest in front of them. Hours seemed to go by, hours she spent reflecting on her life, her failures, and all the things she wished had never happened. I'm really going to die, aren't I? She whispered, a shudder on her lips. Finally, Naruto spoke. Yeah. I see, Myokugo said. And strangely, she began to accept it. Even then, those words still echoed in her mind, those words that told her to survive. Who were they from again? Her brother? Her father? Her friend? The memories were so distant, yet just within her reach. What happens to all those creatures when you die? He asked. They die with me, Myokugo spoke honestly. At that, her wolf snuggled a bit closer, even as it slowly healed from the wounds Naruto had given it. He nodded. Okay. Another bout of silence slipped by, in which she continued to think, time moving slowly, yet so quickly at the same time. The rain had stopped falling, too. She hadn't even noticed. That woman, Mukego whispered. How can she stay by your side without trying to eat you? Naruto leaned back. I don't really know, he revealed. But the truth of the matter is that she decided to change. Change. She's still a demon, Naruto clarified. However, she's working so hard to tame her desires. Could I do the same? Mukego wanted to ask. But she knew the truth. A small taste of his blood had only made her desire to devour humans stronger. It simply wasn't possible for her to change. Or rather, she didn't want to change. The horrible reality was that she liked to kill to eat people. People that had done nothing wrong. She liked to watch them squirm in pain. She enjoyed it to a startling degree. Her veil of shyness was nothing but a farce, a lie used to momentarily reassure her victims, only for her to snuff that hope out once and for all. Naruto might have realized this, because he made no attempts to reason with her. I told your fellow demon that I was willing to give you a chance, all three of you, he said. But even I have my limits. Kindness is a finite resource. Mukego craned neck to face him as he spoke. She could move no other part of her body. Still, she mustered the strength to do this last thing. Also she could look into his eyes, those eyes that reminded her of the time before she became a demon. Someone once told me to survive, no matter what, she said quietly, reflecting on her life. But I don't think becoming a demon was the way, he wanted me to do it. Naruto listened, but said nothing. And that was enough for her. A listening ear. Just above the horizon, the sun was rising, coloring the sky red. Morning already. When was the last time she had seen the sun? 40 years ago, she remembered. I'm scared. Her voice was soft, barely audible. A shudder of terror tingled down her spine. Naruto regarded her with a tender gaze, the light of the sun growing. Will you hold my hand? Mukego whispered. There was a lingering pause. Then she felt it, gentle fingers intertwining with her own. So warm, so soft. So safe. Her eyes began to water. Naruto claimed his kindness was finite, yet here he was, holding her hand. And his sea blue eyes. They held no malice or anger. Only a warmth she could not describe. Thank you, she said for the last time, her vision filled with the brightness of that beautiful morning star. End.